Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Welcome to episode 65 of Lifestyle Pirates with me, Big J, and him, Adriano.
G'day.
This week we're welcoming, God, it's been a few days, isn't it?
I know, right?
Danielle Chiel from KOCO. Good morning, Danielle. How are you?
Good morning, Jonathan.
I got the 3 syllables there. I'm already in trouble.
Yeah, you're in trouble.
Already in trouble. You've been up for a hell of a long time. Why you texted me at 5:30 to make sure we were still on today? Why were you awake at 5:30?
That's actually my normal routine.
That's your routine?
I wake up early in the morning, and if I don't look at the night before what I have to do at the next day, which I didn't do last night because it's the weekend.
Yeah.
So on Friday night, I never look at what I've got to do the next day, but every other day of the week I do that. But because it's the weekend, I wake up in the morning, see what's on today, and just because it was a work, a commitment, I have to check that it's still happening.
Fair enough. So what do your weekends normally look like?
That's a good question. It depends. Depends what's on.
Yep.
As I mentioned to you, that I've taken up a hobby of singing in music theatre.
Yes.
So when that's on, I can hardly get out of bed in the morning because there's a rehearsal or a performance the night before. Mm-hmm. So much of the weekend then is spent either at rehearsal, and if it's not, it's preparing meals so I can do that for the following week. Yeah. So much of the weekend is usually survival mode. So I haven't had like a downtime weekend for a long time.
Fair enough. And what music do you sing?
Right now it's music theatre.
Yeah. So some of the hits from like kind of Android Weber kind of stuff, or is it your own?
Well, I got it. No, oh God, no. I'm a beginner in that area,
but
and I got in.
You've also got a PhD in music, so that's why I wanted to ask.
Well, that background is totally different to what I'm doing now.
Okay.
But this is music theatre, and I just decided during COVID that I wanted to audition for something, and I auditioned for the Pirates of Penzance.
Awesome.
It's Gilbert and Sullivan, from England in the 1800s, and I got in.
Very good.
Yeah, wow.
So that was the beginning of it. And this week I've done 3 auditions actually. One at Bankstown, one at Normanhurst, which is at 10 p.m. at night, and on Monday it's at Mossman.
Wow, okay. And how apt that you're on Lifestyle Pirates, the podcast. There you go.
Oh, all right.
Meant to be, Danielle. Meant to be. Now, you are a businesswoman, you're an author, you're a speaker. I mentioned you've got a PhD. Having a PhD in music and then the fashion world, kind of walk me through that. How did the PhD in music come about?
The PhD in music came around really because I was raised by 2 parents who went to university.
Yep.
And in that era, it's quite rare to have 2 university-educated parents. And so it was a given that their children, or in this case their daughter, was going to be university-educated.
Okay.
But the story goes, like when I was in grade 8 at school, I went to a girls' private school where they taught you, girls can do anything. You have to go to university and you're capable of anything. Not this girl. This girl wanted to leave and go to a fashion college.
Okay.
And when I asked my mother if I could change schools and go to a fashion school, you know your parents, if looks could kill, I got one of those looks.
Yeah, right, okay.
And so I never asked again. So I continued in music, got the degree, got the PhD, and thought, I've kept them happy now. It's my turn.
Okay.
So that desire, I loved that music journey. As you can tell, I did well in it and I thrived and I really loved it. I was at university institutes around the world on a scholarship. But that little girl desire that I had at age 13 of loving fashion and texture, that urge had never left me. So I never wanted to be one of those people 6 foot under and thought I always wish I had but.
Yeah.
And due to different life circumstances, I left music and went on that journey.
Yeah. So where did the fashion bit come from? If mum and dad were both academics, was that a natural because they dressed well, or have you always just liked fashion, or were you watching shows, or where did that kind of, I guess, interest at such a young age come from?
Good question. So I'm of the era that TV actually wasn't in homes when I was born. Like TV, people think you have to be 900 years old to not be around when TV was there. I'm not, of my mother's era who's still alive. So I didn't grow up with a TV. So I didn't get it from TV. It came from, I guess like all things in life, it's always more than one factor. I kind of always use the analogy that my brain's a bit like the sun with all the rays coming out. So lots of points go there and then it jiggles around.
That's
so
cool.
The fashion industry came from when I was growing up. My parents did send me to lots of holiday craft classes.
Yeah.
You know, pottery classes, sewing classes, painting classes, really creative classes. Like I can remember at home building underneath our house, because I grew up in Queensland, so we had stumps.
Yep.
And I can remember putting big sheets of plastic around the stumps and painting them purple. And I made my very own purple home. So I always did and was encouraged in school holidays, just not for a career, to do very creative things.
Yep.
And at school we did sewing classes.
Yep. Was that home economics? Did you guys call it here?
It was called that, but this wasn't home economics.
Yeah.
This was a mandatory part, like in grade 5 and grade 6.
Right.
Like I made bloomers by hand. I had to do lots of sewing. And I always did really well, and it's over the most stupid thing. Like when you learn to sew, you have to draw a thread in a piece of fabric, and you can see the threads where it's woven, and you had to go up 2 and down 2 and up 2 and down 2 threads so that we had even running stitches. And for whatever it's worth, what I thought was an absolute no-brainer, nobody else in the class could be bothered counting 2 and 2 and 2 and 2. So I was the only one in the class that always got 10 out of 10 for sewing.
Oh, wow.
So I just always liked that.
Yeah. Okay.
And I guess it's just never gone away. I love that sort of thing.
Yeah. So what was I mean, first of all,
I think it's, you call it attention to detail, really.
Yeah.
That's my thing now with knitting and what I've got involved in.
yeah.
But I think from a very early age I had that attention to detail.
Yeah. And so what took you to India in the first place? Because, I mean, was it the Aussie, Australians have this passion and kind of romance for travel. Was that just you went on a kind of backpacker holiday, or did you
Definitely
go with family?
not.
What
Definitely not.
Genesis of
My
that idea?
youngest son and I went to India
Yep.
about 4 years ago before I started the business.
Yep.
And I vouched and vowed I would never step foot in that country ever again. We had the most horrendous experience ever.
Why? What happened?
Why is that?
It was just shocking. It was very, very hot.
Like
The food
Australian summer hot or worse?
Worse, like high 40s.
Oh, wow.
That's brutal.
Yeah, that's horrible.
At that time, I paid what we'd always gone on holidays in youth hostels and stuff like that. And because it was India and I was just a girl by myself with my son, I paid what I thought was a small fortune for hotel accommodation, you know, a few $100s a night.
Mm-hmm.
The food was disastrous.
Really?
I remember they washing, this is a long time ago now, but I remember they washed the tomatoes in detergent.
Oh,
And so
what?
when I cut a tomato, like you could taste the detergent.
Oh no.
And yeah, the food was just horrendous. The whole thing wasn't good. I remember changing borders from one state to another state, and we had to wait in this long queue while the driver had to go and get permission to go across the border.
Yeah.
He wound up the windows. It's baking hot.
No air conditioning.
Because there were wild monkeys and whatever, like people touting tourists, because this was all tourists. So we're sitting in the car. It's scalding hot with wild monkeys climbing all over the car. And then, lo and behold, a cobra, like whatever you call it, a snake charmer comes out. And like I remember saying to my son Michael, do not look at them under any circumstance because they'll want money. So we're looking straight ahead, and this cobra comes up the side of the window across. So we had snakes crawling on the outside of the car, monkeys jumping everywhere. It's like baking hot, and I just couldn't. That was just one of the experiences.
Sounds like Indiana Jones.
I was going
It
to
was
say the exact same
horrendous.
thing. Like, I was literally verbatim going to say the exact same thing. Wow. So, forgive me for asking this, and you've probably been asked before then, Danielle. How the hell and why did you then decide to go back and set up a business in India?
It was just one of those life things that what happened was I had a hand knitting store. in Brisbane. I grew it from scratch to be one of Australia's largest independent hand knitting stores. And sold that, moved to Sydney, and wanted to start my own brand selling finished hand knitted garments. It was just on a journey into that, maybe only 1 year, like very short journey into it. And somebody got on to me from the AWI, the wool industry, and said, this is great, would you like to do a fashion parade? They sponsored a fashion parade. They said, this is great, we can help you expand. I was in the CBD, I can't remember what building or who it was meeting with, saying, we're going to support you to do this. It was a fantastic concept, you know, Australian made, Australian hand knitting. This was years ago, like 15, a long time ago.
Yeah, because you've been doing this for over 10 years, haven't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then I got a phone call from the same guy who chaired this meeting that thought this whole concept was amazing. And you could tell by his tone of voice, he said, I need you to come into a meeting. We've got something to tell you. And there was just something that, you know, I'm like, God, what's going to unfold? You can just tell people.
Was it excitement or trepidation, though?
Seriousness is the word that I would use.
Right, okay.
And I walked into the meeting and everybody's already there. And there's this young girl sitting at the end of the table crying. And I'm like, what the hell is going on here?
It's intimidating.
Yeah. And I just sat down and he said, brace yourself. And I'm like, you know, what else is going to come out? Anyway, he told me that the legislation changed and it was no longer legal to, so at that point in time I paid pensioners or women, I'd find the knitters by placing ads in suburban magazines saying, would you like to get paid for your hobby? And it was under the Gillard administration that became illegal because we became responsible for their workers' health and compensation in their homes.
Yeah, right.
So I'm like, I'm not going to their homes. So the business finished right at that conversation, right then and there.
So you had built a network then. So this was like a real community project from the outset. So you'd built a network of...
I had 150 Australian women knitting for me.
Wow.
Wow.
What, in Brisbane or in Sydney?
Everywhere.
Everywhere, but mostly in Sydney.
Yeah, wow, okay.
So I had my Brisbane knitters because that's where I was from. I kept those and I had the knitters in Sydney.
Yeah.
And from that meeting, you had to pivot from there.
Well, from that meeting, that was the end of it. So, I don't know, somebody said to me, what are you going to do now? And I think even one of my sons said, what are you going to do now? I've got 2 boys. And I just sort of stopped for a minute and I said, no, you should know your mother better than that by now. There's no turning back. I'm not going back to music. I think when a friend asked me that, I said, yeah, I just laughed and I said, no, that's like going back to an old boyfriend. That's not going to happen. So I needed some space to think what was going to happen. So maybe for a few weeks or a month, there was just nothing because I just needed to think. And I looked into Vietnam. I started to look at other countries of where to get garments manufactured. And I've always been a really lucky girl. I've always met the right person at the right time. And I didn't realise it during that time, but this was another example. So what happened was this guy phoned me that I hadn't seen for ages. In fact, I met him at a LinkedIn seminar when LinkedIn was first launched. Right, so that'll tell you how long ago it was.
Do you like a bit of a LinkedIn?
Yeah. And because at that LinkedIn seminar, he was a computer whiz kid and he said, I can help you launch this on the computer, whatever.
Internet.
Yeah. Anyway, I'd never heard from him. I just kept on my journey. He called me up and said, you want to have lunch? Well, it couldn't have been a better time because I had nothing to do. I was trying to figure out what to do. So right now I don't have 5 seconds to breathe. And
lunch sounds great.
And that's most of my life. But in that period of time, I could have had a lunch that went for like a month. Yeah. And so I met with him and, you know, how you been? Haven't seen you for a long time. So I asked him that and he started to tell me all this. You know, my wife got cancer, so-and-so died, this happened. Wow. And so I'm sitting there listening to that and he said, like, how are you? So I'm like, in my head, I'm like, in comparison to you, I'm fine.
Yeah.
So I just answered, yeah, I'm really well, thank you. That was the end of that and we just kept going. And chatting about different things. And then I said to him, well, I'm really well, but I just thought I'd tell you I have nothing to do with my life right now, and I'm really not sure what I'm going to do. And he said, what happened? I told him the story. And he said, my boss was the sales manager or the top manager of Hewlett-Packard. Yeah. He's retired and he lives in India. I think the pair of you would get on and he will help you launch this in India.
Yeah, wow.
So he introduced me to this random guy. I can remember emailing him every day for about 3 weeks. And he, there was no Zoom, meeting somebody like that then. So he did everything actually via email to deter me. You can't do this unless you live here. It'll be too hard for you. And I guess unconsciously even at that point in time in my life, I knew that I'm pretty resilient and I wanted to do this. So it came to a point in the email and I just said, I'm coming.
And this was after you'd already done the trip to India.
Yeah.
I know,
and
right?
India actually didn't have anything to do with it. It more like...
It was just
I wanted
the business going.
Yeah, I it could have been any country. I wanted to meet knitters. I wanted to continue on my journey.
Was it the same place in India?
No.
Okay.
It was down south. So the holiday was up north in Rajasthan.
Yeah.
What I call a tourist triangle.
Yeah.
And I got off the plane in Chennai, which is down the south.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I met this guy and he introduced me to 10 women who could already knit, but I know people throw off that knitting being an old person's hobby, but the reality is it's like teaching someone to do an Olympic sport. Knitting is a language and it's physical. It's like learning an instrument. And so saying that these people could knit is like you telling me you can walk and I can train you to be an Olympic runner. Like their level and what I needed couldn't have been further apart if you tried.
Yeah.
Right.
So they knew the concept and that's about it. Like it's like if I said to you, you're going to become a pole jumper. Like you know the concept, but that's about as far as it goes. Anyway.
I can see you as a pole jumper.
It's actually my profession.
Anyway, so I met these ladies and it was a really amazing experience because you look at each other. You know when you meet somebody, when you go to a party even, in a crowded room, you think unconsciously, like, I'd love to talk to them. Nah, I'm not going to talk to them. You sort of sum up the room a bit. So is it all right if I touch you?
Yeah, it's fine.
So what happened is they went like this and they took my hand like this and they took my hand like this and they just kept holding my hand like this and walked me around their village. And I can't speak Tamil and they couldn't speak English. And just the eye contact, and they pointed out to me, like you could tell, this is my mother, this is where I live, these are my children, this is my mother-in-law. And these people had lived there in these villages. Like as an Australian, I didn't really have a concept of what a village was like. And they never left that village for literally thousands of years. So they lived in hardened mud houses with hardened mud floors and thatched roofs. And I took them around the village and there was just some attraction between them and me. And on the plane, on the way home, I thought, I'm going to shut down my brand and I'm going to knit for lots of brands because I think I could employ a lot of you. And that's how the transition occurred. So the fact that it was in India was kind of irrelevant.
Yeah. Because I remember when your brand used to be your name, and so the KOCO concept. This is the bit you're talking about.
That's right.
Yeah.
So when I met you, the brand was my name.
Yeah.
And that's what I started before it closed down because of that legislation. You probably remember it, bonds went offshore.
Yeah.
It was really the era that all Australian manufacturing closed down.
Yeah.
And all the brands
the
went off.
catalyst? Yeah.
And it was in that era. So that's what happened there. A lot of it wasn't made explicit because you can't really go on the news saying these sorts of things because people jump down your throat and whatever. You just sort of...
That's why I do a podcast.
So what does business and employment look like in India? Like
India is a democratic country. Like it's like Australia. Like people think even though it's a third world, like there are laws and, if you break the law, even though there was corruption and bribery, you're still fined if you break the law and put in jail. I mean, and because it was founded by the British, much of the law is similar to Australia.
Yeah.
So you just can't walk in there as a foreigner and start. I mean, I've jumped hurdles, really large ones. Like one time I went to India and I just walked the streets of the nearest local town, I suppose you'd call it, looking for a sign in English that said accountant. And I'd just go in there and say, do you speak English? And if they said yes, then I started with that accountant, like forming a company, having to give all sorts of documentation, blah, blah, blah. And then it unfolds. It's like any country. There are people who are skilled in their profession and aren't. And, you know, I won't tell you how many accountants I've been through. Oh, look what's happening. That's not okay. Okay, bye. I have to walk the street again and find the next one. Yeah. And gradually you just sort of move up as you learn what not to do.
Yeah.
But that's how it unfolded, and that was the story, really.
So you were on the plane back, having been, you know, led around these villages. What was going through your mind?
Just what an amazing experience it was. Like the very first visit that I went there, I stayed in a bamboo hut, and I remember getting up in the middle of the night, going to the toilet, and excuse, you know, no subject matter off limits.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely
and
not.
a frog jumped up the toilet and hit me on the bottom. And like I'm screaming in the middle of the night, and I came back and found a therapist to say, I've been so traumatized in India, I don't really want to go back. And yet I want to do this so badly. I want to produce commercialize a hand artisan concept.
Yeah.
So the drive was bigger. So like I've had lots, that's a stupid little thing, and the accountant's a more serious thing, but you know, there were lots of things that happened along the way. I've got like a million stories of, oh my God, what now?
So then, because I think, I mean, to put it crudely, it's kind of offshoring, but I think it's
definitely
it's
offshoring.
a lot deeper for you, given your experience and things. So, what then did you then do? So you've come back, seen your therapist. What then did you then? What was that process? So you kind of went, right, do I now need to... did you do the same thing that you did in Brisbane and Sydney, where you go... Because obviously you couldn't knock on doors and find out where the old ladies lived. How did you recruit and I guess source the people or the villages? You know, what was that kind of process look like? And then how did you train them? I assume you pay them. Like, how does all that stuff work?
It was quite organic as it unfolded, because I sort of have business in my DNA. Like my parents were in business. As my children joke, I don't know if you'd ever make a very good employee, Mum. So you just work it out as you go. But the women in India were in their 20s.
Right. And
so it was a trade for them. Like their husbands were tilers or painters, and they came to work and hand knitted. Yeah. So I ran initially and wrote whole training programs, like modules and modules, 30 modules, you know, teaching them all the different... Hand knitting's a language. Like you can never learn too much. That's my fascination with it.
Right.
So I wrote all those modules. They couldn't read. They'd never been to school or minimum education.
That was my next question was, I assume you wrote them in English?
So the patterns were in English, so I had to teach them that. And then I remember one time getting on the plane with these massive charts, because I bought paper, I don't even know the size of it now, A0, and put it in these tubes that I took on the plane, where I charted out all the knitting so that they could read it visually while I was teaching them the words, so we could still produce garments.
Yeah.
And I grew the business and use that to this very day on a concept of opposites. So yes, no. Gets a bit confusing in India though, because it's not quite so clear, yes, no. But yeah, exactly. So even that gets really tricky, but we do yes, no, front, back, up, down, and the crucial one, same or different.
Yeah.
So that was that. And like, also I remember the second night there, I went to bed really late trying to memorize the names of these ladies. I mean, now they just roll off your tongue like water, bangles, sky, grass, but the names were so foreign to me, and I really wanted to say good morning, whatever their name was. And so I spent hours trying to learn their names and put their face, with their name. So it was personalised from the beginning.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that struck me from that day one was, they're just people like you and I.
Of course.
And all they want, just like you and I, is a life that they're really happy with. If they were married, they want money to be able to send their children to school. So it's not even about the schooling. It's like all parents want to give their children opportunities that they didn't have, that they wish they'd had. And it's this thing of, wow, we're all people at the end of the day. And it's sort of shifted to that, I need someone to make my garments. And then when I got the name, knit one garment, change one life, because when you haven't been to school, you've never had the opportunity to knit or to make or have a whole project. So the question that I know I've done a huge amount of talking, but the question I'd like to ask you is, do you remember the first project that you ever handed in at school?
Absolutely not.
What was the first project at school that you remember? And
I think
how
it was a
old were you?
dinosaur.
Yeah? How old were you?
Oh, it would be in year 3. What's that? How old is that? 10? Is that 10? No, that's less than that. I think what's year 3? I think it's 6, 7, something like that. Yeah, it was a dinosaur project. I was very proud of it, actually.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what was it about that project that made you feel so proud?
I think I had to draw a dinosaur, actually, and then I had to talk about the dinosaur. And I was so proud of how I drew the dinosaur. It was way better than I ever thought I could do. And then when I handed it in, I was well researched on it. So I did a lot of research on it. And then when I handed it in, it's probably one of the biggest effort I've ever put into a project, actually.
And were you externally rewarded for that? Like, did teachers, parents, friends also say to you, that is amazing? Or was it all from within?
No, it was a bit of both. I was a very troubled student at school. So for me to actually hand in a project is already a bonus. So my teachers were quite surprised that I put so much effort into it. And then when I handed it in, they were very complimentary. And I was pretty happy with myself as well.
So that must have been a really rewarding feeling for you, because here we are X decades later, and that story is the first one that comes out.
Yeah.
So it really did something inside.
For sure.
That was enriching to your life. So imagine never having that feeling, because that was only the first time you've had it. So these ladies had never had that feeling until they met me.
Yeah, that's an amazing thing that you've been able to provide them.
So that knitting a whole jumper, and it's like, I made this.
Yeah.
They've never had that. So in rural villages, and it's just traditional culture really, it's one of those women things that it's male dominant. So you get to a certain age and the parents arrange the marriage. So you're taught never to make a decision. So the parents make the decision for you about who you're going to marry. And then once you're married, your husband makes all decisions for you. We need food, go to the supermarket. You can't do that work. Can I please go and do this? So they're taught without decisions. And so by the time you get that experience of knitting that project and knowing what that reward feels like, this is how I remember one day, 5 years in, one of the ladies said to me, Danielle, you've given us wings that help us fly. You've set my brain free.
Jeez.
Yeah, wow.
Because I asked them, like, what do you want to do? They're like, I don't know. And I'm like, you do know. What
Probably
is
never
it
been
that
asked
you
that
actually, 100%, what is it that you actually want?
So can I play devil's advocate a little bit?
Yeah.
Here? So were you presented with any challenges on giving these women opportunities by perhaps their partners, or just that kind of culture?
Everybody asks me that.
That kind of
I was thinking the same thing. It's a big disturbance.
Yeah, that's a big ripple, and that will have a ripple effect, which I'm sure over 10 years on you're starting to see. But was there anyone going, "Oh, hey, hang on, who's this? Who's this Aussie?
Who's this
coming in
white
town?"
woman? Yeah.
That's giving my wife a brain, to use one of your things, and give my wife wings and hope, and hope's probably wrong, but do you know what I mean? Like, was there?
I'm sure there was,
Yeah.
but the answer that I always give is my concern was actually the women.
Yeah.
I didn't go into their home. I didn't ask about their relationship unless they came to me.
Yeah.
So, most of those women in one village that we had then had husbands that hit them a lot. They're married to men who drink a lot. Like, I can remember talking to one girl and she came to work crying on this particular day, and I'm like, what happened? And like, I learnt through a translator, I intentionally chose not to speak that language so that it forces them to speak more English.
Yeah.
Every day when her husband saw her, he would say, "Your face is so ugly, I wish I didn't have to look at you."
What the fuck? Sorry.
Yeah. No, seriously. And so I would then respond with, "What do you do when he says that? What do you really want to do?" So I became their support agent as well as their knitting skill, and they just gradually, I guess the thing is they love coming to work. Even to this very day, they'll tell you it's our safe space.
And so...
And they've got their friends and they can talk about, it's like the women's gossip circle. Yeah. And proudly, as a result of that, we were named by B Corp as being one of the best in the world for building communities.
Wow. Awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, thanks.
So am I right in thinking then, unlike Australia, the Australian model where they were knitting at home, you actually gave them a place to knit, like a community.
We rent
hall
buildings.
Right,
we
okay.
rent buildings, and if they didn't have it, we paid for the construction of the building.
Right.
So and this actually then placed us as being one of the highest standard, like I call us the Maserati of hand knitting.
Yeah.
So of course we have. There are many places around the world that hand knit, but to the best of my knowledge, we're the only ones that come to a central location and give the women work, and that also keeps the standard up very high of the garments that we produce. So we've produced garments for really big runway brands that everyone would have heard of, and then as long as it's hand knitting, we take the business on.
Yeah.
So we have knitted for 1,000 brands that you never would have heard of, and then since COVID, I've had to be really... lateral thinking how can I do this, because the planes didn't fly and, the freight prices has gone through the roof.
Skyrocket.
So we started knitting for corporates too, wall hangings, logos, all sorts of different things.
Cool. So going back to the communities, when you were going over there, how long were your visits?
When I first went, I almost went every 6 weeks.
Right, okay.
And then what happened was, as I sort of got into it and we got busier, I would stay for a month.
Okay.
And then it went to like 3 months. And then I became almost like a gypsy, because I'd fly there, do my work, go to Europe, exhibit at trade fairs, get more customers, come back there, come back home, and then that's one season, and then you do it again for the next season.
Yeah. That's cool. That's very exciting.
What was your accommodation?
I really
like
enjoyed it at the time.
Accommodation was better the next time round compared to your first trip to India?
Well, I stayed in that place quite a few times, and then eventually I rented a room in one of the villages as I got to know the area. And that sort of also made it, she's equal with us, like she stays with us. And everyone said to me, that village isn't safe. And I'm like, those women would never let anything happen to me. I'm not in the slightest afraid.
Yeah. So do you speak Hindi now?
It was Tamil. It's down the south.
Yeah.
And no.
Okay.
Like I can say, hello, how are you? And that's about it.
So how many ladies did you start with?
10.
And how many do you have now?
Right now we have 60 or 70.
Wow.
But before COVID, we were like around the 250, 270 mark, and we were well on the way to being the largest all-girls company in the world from women who had never been to school.
Yeah.
But we're an import depending on what hat I want to wear, it's like, what do you do for a living? On that particular day when COVID had the outbreak, we were importers and exporters. And when there's no planes, zippo business.
Yeah.
So I thought I'd lost the whole lot. So now underneath, I'm paddling really hard to build it back up, and it is slowly building back up, but it's taken a mighty lot of work.
And so, were you obviously? I can imagine you would have missed your friends over there. Were you able to stay in contact with them in COVID?
I have all the leaders of the village speak English.
Yep.
It's part of getting the job.
Yeah.
And we have regular staff meetings on Zoom in English. Since COVID, it's one of those things, if you guys are too young to know this, but if you're a good parent, you actually give your children wings to fly, and you don't worry about them when they go out, because you know that they have really good values and they can look after themselves and they'll be safe. And it's a bit the same of these ladies. From me not going there, they've lifted what they've done, and we've implemented all sorts of other quality control measures, and companies have given us mobile phones so that the girls can all do their own quality control, and we have a digital quality control and a hands-on quality control. So the standard, since I've stopped going, has actually risen quite significantly. Because they used to be so dependent on me. Oh, Danielle will fix it. Danielle will see this and she'll make us fix it up. It was all about Danielle will do this and Danielle will do that. And as hard as I tried when I was going there to make them responsible for their own work, because I told you they've never made a decision, so they've never actually had to be responsible for themselves.
Or had the confidence.
100%. That's grown enormously, and that's a big upside of this whole COVID thing.
Right. That's huge.
That's a good takeaway.
That's huge, yeah. And so you're able to go back and forth there now?
No, I have chosen not to, and that's got nothing to do with COVID. I've actually had heart surgery.
Right.
I've had 2 surgeries. One of it unfolded while I was in India. That was a nightmare.
That must have been petrifying.
Well, what unfolded was, as I've always said through the years, if anything ever happens to me in India, make sure you fly me home.
Yeah.
I never want to be in one of those rural hospitals.
Oh, can't imagine.
And so I was flying from a trade show in Paris to India, going into the details, vomited all the way, had never done that on a trip, but, it's everybody's worst nightmare. Thought I'd be better once I hit land. Vomited all night, realised something's wrong, went to the receptionist and I said, I need a doctor. She said, there's a hospital 3 buildings up. So it was like 4 a.m. I walked up the street, God only knows where I was, to some random hospital, and they told me something's wrong with my heart. So I was in hospital there. They put me on a drip, nearly lost my arm. I still have the scar here. It swelled from here to here because they missed the vein.
You're kidding me.
And my arm was going, and they're like, you have to eat. And I'm like, nothing. I seriously had no energy. I hadn't eaten for 4 days in hospital. My arm was swelling enormously. And I remember one day saying, you'll have to take the drip out. And they said, we can't do that. And I said, if you don't take it out, I will. So I actually took the drip out. Thank God I'm well connected. I phoned somebody I knew who I'd met on the Australian Indian Business Council. Her husband knew and worked in another hospital in India. That woman saved my life. She took an ambulance and I went to another hospital where they did their thing.
Yeah.
I thought I was better. Spent, a week in that hospital, took myself to a hotel, some fancy hotel, very fancy, because I wanted a proper meal by this stage.
More than a few $100 a night?
Yes, in India, in that city. Yeah. And then went down to work. So I stayed in India for a couple of months then, went home and just went to a cardiologist for a checkup.
Yeah.
And they said, oh, what's happened there? You're going to have surgery. So my mitral valve had prolapsed. It's like the elastic in your underpants. It stretched out and it never stretched back in.
Yeah.
So they had to repair that. And when they were in there, they found out that I was born with a hole in my heart. And so they fixed that.
And you didn't know that?
No.
Right.
And lots of people apparently have it and don't know.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
But having told that, I grew up swimming a lot, and it made sense because I never could do endurance swimming. Yeah. Like I would win one lap and I could never do endurance. Yeah. And like I understand now why. Right. Anyway, so they fixed that. And I guess it's because of that. And then what happened was I had to have a second surgery because they realised after the first one something happened and not enough oxygen was going to my brain. Like I always felt awful. And I thought, this is how I'm going to outlive my days. Yeah. So I'm a bionic woman. I'm a product of modern medicine. So I wear a defibrillator. So this thing here is like half the size of your iPhone. Okay. So I had a second surgery. They put this in. And after that, I was better. Like you can tell I'm no different to you. Yeah. And it's because of this device.
So that's active all the time as a defibrillator?
All the time.
It's not just...
So if I need it, it's there.
Okay, so it's not like working right now, but if you start...
No, because I'm fine. If something... Yeah. So since I've had it inserted, which is 18 months now, it's kicked in once.
Yeah. Do you feel it when it kicks in?
Yeah, you know.
Yeah.
But it's amazing, and modern medicine is amazing. But you asked about going back to India. So it's really because of this that I've chosen not to fly, because I won't fly anywhere, let alone India. I just have this voice inside me, don't get on a plane.
That's fair.
Because it's asking for trouble, and I'm well without it, so why would I ask for trouble?
Yeah.
You know, I have a device that's beside my bed, and they download the information every night, and it goes somewhere to America. And when I had this device, I remember Googling it, and I connected with the guy who invented it on LinkedIn, and I sent him a message saying, like, I can't thank you enough.
Yeah, wow.
And that's how I got into the singing, because I couldn't breathe after the surgery, my lungs, so I took up swimming and singing so that I could breathe, and that's become like a passionate hobby instead of living on an aeroplane.
Right.
So there you go.
There you go. But the business is still going, so they're just
only just by the skin of its teeth. Like I'm working very hard behind the scenes to get more and more customers to grow it back, but we're still there,
And when you say customers, you mean brands that want you to knit things?
Brands and
the end user.
Yeah, any corporate person. We've got hand knitted gifts. We do hand knitted logos. We do hand knitted wall hangings. We can do customized jumpers with logos. Like anybody who wants hand knitting, I reach out to now more than just the fashion brands.
Yeah. Wow. Who would be your ideal brand to work with?
It's really interesting because it's, you know, a lot of people would say a name drop brand, you know, like Gucci or one of those famous big brands. But for me, a brand that's ideal for the business to work with is somebody who gives repeat orders on a regular basis, because brands are so fickle. You know, one season they could give nothing, another season it can be hundreds, thousands or whatever, and then you don't hear from them for 2 years, and then they want another thing. So it's very hard running a business like that because it's all over the place. So the ideal customer is somebody who's stable.
Yeah. And I guess over the years, have you seen a change in, because I think fashion's quite disposable now as well. We don't tend to keep a lot of things for a long period of time. And I know that your garments, they're Aussie merino wool. Is that right?
We knit out of all sorts of fibres, of which one is wool. Like anybody who asks us to knit anything, we've done. So we've knitted from saris that are shredded up. We've knitted from recycled plastic. We've knitted from, you know, anything. So it's not just wool. Alpaca, silk, any product that you can knit with, we've knitted with it, and as long as it's knitting.
Yeah, okay. So the disposable fashion thing is actually good for you then, isn't it? If you can knit from other things, because then you could say you're upcycling.
Well, we do upcycle, and we don't waste any thread. So we've got garments that we've knitted from all our scrap yarns that we've tied together.
I've seen them.
We buy yarn from a recycled mill in India. They buy the clothes that usually goes to the Earth's landfill, and they break it down and spin it. So we buy that yarn as well.
What's the quality of yarn like when you're pulling apart other garments to make? yarn.
It's actually really good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
It feels normal. The look of it is what I call a bit of a rugged outdoor look.
Yeah.
It's not like a soft, fluffy look that you're going to wear out to a posh dinner. Like some garments look like softer and a bit more dressy, more
Well, looking at some of the
feminine, for want
fashion
of a
these
better
days, the rugged look is probably in anyway.
Says the man that's not had a shave for a week.
All right, ease up, mate. It's part of the look.
Well, this yarn sort of thing would be the sort of thing that if you went to a soccer match on the weekend, it's that look, not sort of going out to a posh dinner look. Yeah. That's
like
the look of that yarn. Absolutely. So we'll get you in a jumper after this podcast.
Yeah, sounds good.
So with
I'm extra medium, by the way.
Extra medium. I haven't heard of that size before. Is that a small, large?
Yeah, look, it depends on what country you're in.
So are you? I kind of get the sense that whilst it was a byproduct of a government decision, I get the sense there's actually a lot of gratitude. Huge. When you talk about your journey, because you're very animated, your eyes are sparkling, you've been smiling for the whole thing that you've been telling this story. So is there a lot of kind of gratitude about how this has come about and how it's played out?
I've struggled a lot financially through that COVID thing. But in the scheme of life, full stop, from a little girl, like learning to do these things, I feel really blessed. I feel that I've led a very rich life. I've had a lot of experiences that many people never have. And like I'm firmly planted in middle age now, so it takes a long time to learn about yourself. Yeah. And every decade that goes by, most people learn more and more about themselves, what they like, what they don't like, what their personality is. And I've learned through the years, like I'm really resilient. I'm really strong lateral thinker. So if something comes up, I can always think of like 5 other ways. In fact, that's what I've taught the ladies. So if they come to me with an issue, in my head, it's like, I'm not your Panadol for your problems. So, I say to them, what's one thing you could do? What else could you do? What's another thing you can do? Oh, do you have any other ideas of what she could do? So which one feels right for you? What are you going to do? So I really feel, I've led a really rich life. And because of this whole thing, I'm really, really lucky to be alive, and I just love it.
Yeah. Brilliant.
That's awesome.
I think it's phenomenal.
So you started off with music with your PhD, and you've fallen back in love with it just recently. So what's brought you back into music?
It started because of the heart surgery. Because I don't know if you know anybody that's had major surgery, but after having surgery, they have that little. Have you ever seen that little device that has a ping pong ball in it? You might have seen it on TV. You blow into it you have to have the ping pong
goes
rise.
Up and down,
have you seen that?
Yeah, I have.
So I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So when I was in hospital, I couldn't do it. And so everybody on my floor, male and female, could do this.
Yeah.
And they were all at least 10 or 20 or 30 years older than me.
Yeah.
And they all could do this.
Yeah.
And because I was young, the nurse's attitude was, oh, don't worry, she'll get this. She's fine, she'll do it.
Yeah.
But I never could.
Yeah.
And I knew that something was wrong with my breathing.
Yeah.
So I just went on this whole journey of different breathing specialists, different, releasing your ribs. Like there's a whole thing into this whole breathing thing. So like anything I've taken on, I've always gone into a lot of detail. So I know a lot about what I know, and I don't know anything about a whole lot of stuff. I'm not a generalist.
You mentioned before attention to detail. So.
So when I go down a rabbit hole, I really go down it.
Sounds familiar.
So I went down this, I think it's part of being on the spectrum, I've learned in my old age, but whatever. So I went down this rabbit hole of breathing, and 2 of the things like swimming and singing, that just came to me. So that's how the joy of music started again, really, because of her heart surgery.
Yeah.
And the whole breathing. So you've got to learn to breathe to sing.
So tell me, what musical theatre you said?
Yes.
So is that singing, dancing and acting all at the same time?
Yes, but whilst I did learn ballet and whatnot growing up, I never thought that – I wouldn't call it dancing. I'd just call it like walking around the stage. But recently I went for an audition.
Sounds like me on the dance floor.
Yeah. My first boyfriend was really good at cha-cha,
Yeah,
the jive. We used to go to country dances. In fact, I'd love that. So I'm coordinated, but I'm middle-aged. I wouldn't call myself a dancer or go to a dance school or anything. And I went to this audition. They're like, sing the song, fine, tick the box.
Yeah.
And then a new experience, read the lyrics. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense, read the lyrics. And then he says, the guy running the audition, nobody is to leave because we're going to have a dance audition. This was just last week at 10 p.m. at Blacktown. My eyes nearly popped out of my head. It's like a dance audition? Anyway, they had like lunges up and down the room and all this other stuff. And in my head, it's like, I'm auditioning for a role of a middle-aged woman because I am middle-aged, like thinking that I'd fit the part. And these lunges are for the pirates in the show. It's like, I really don't think I need to do this. Yeah. But anyhow, I was really proud of myself. I did the lunges up and down. I won't tell you that I couldn't walk the next day. So lucky you didn't get me over here walking up the stairs then. But yeah, it is a bit of that. But I don't audition for like Mamma Mia where they've got dancing and prancing all over the stage. Yeah, I've ruled that one out.
Yeah.
Is there a show that you'd love to perform in?
Well, I really love this Gilbert and Sullivan that I've got into now. I love that a lot. So I love that. Stephen Sondheim is an amazing composer. He is in America at the same time as Andrew Lloyd Webber was in London. I don't know if you know Stephen Sondheim, but he's written some amazing musicals. I'd love to be in one of his. The music, the guy's a genius. The music's amazing.
What's some of his musicals?
Into the Woods. I have to sort of that's in the top of my head now.
Okay.
You're putting the pressure on. I can't think what else
Yeah, I know,
off the
right,
top
John?
of my head. But there's a lot of them. When I leave here, I'll think of the
Wasn't
whole
prepared
list.
for an exam, John.
No, that's okay. I'm okay about. No, not at all.
It's funny because we had
Just refreshed. I couldn't get out of bed this morning. My brain's not switched on in that area.
we had one of the cast from Hamilton on the podcast.
Oh, did you?
And he did about 5 or 6 roles, didn't he, Julia?
Yeah.
And we were kind of observing that, unfortunately, Australia, you get one show for a long period of time, whereas when you go to the USA or you go to the UK and you go to the West End, for example, the shows just run for 20, 30, 40 years. Like Les Mis, Phantom of the Opera, Cats, Miss Saigon, that kind of stuff. They're just on all the time because you've got the demand and the tourism and basically the supply. Whereas here, we're not as lucky, which is a real shame because it was a massive part of my life going to the theatre. And I absolutely loved it, but we don't really get the opportunity to do it too much here.
Yes, well, they're professionals too, and keep in mind, like, we're amateurs, and I don't like to use that word amateur because it implies beginner. But the people that are in the show, I'm the total beginner, and the singers that I'm surrounded by are at a whole different stratosphere to me, and because it's not paid for, which is what amateur is, not beginners.
That's okay. We're amateur podcast hosts.
It's true.
These people, like, you go on to the next show and the next show, and that's what keeps the interest.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yep.
and it takes a massive amount of learning to learn all that music.
Of course.
Total respect to anybody on the stage because the hours that you put in, it's huge,
Big
huge.
time. What's one thing you do differently if you could go back and do things again?
Not a thing.
That's awesome.
Not one
Brilliant.
thing. Because as I've said to my children growing up, it's really dangerous to go back and say, I wish I had done this at this age, because most people think that. But my stance on that is most of us make the right decision for us at that time in our life with the knowledge that we have at that time. If you would make a different decision 10 years later, it's because you've had different life experiences and you have different knowledge that you didn't have then.
Yeah.
So no point in beating yourself up for knowledge that you didn't have.
I think that was a phenomenal answer.
That is great.
And actually probably a nice way to conclude the episode. That was a very, very good message, Danielle.
Thank you for sharing your story.
Pleasure.
Yeah, that's awesome.
For those of that have tuned in, they're listening to the podcast, but they want to learn more about you, buy products, engage. How do people get hold of you?
Send me an email, Danielle at KOCO.global.
Perfect.
Awesome.
And we'll include that in the show notes as well. Danielle, thank you for coming on Lifestyle Pirates.
Pleasure. Lifestyle Pirates. I didn't pick that one up until the end.
And we shall see you guys next week for next week's show.
Hooroo.